Welcome to Issues of Contemporary Politics with Dr. Brovkin. Today is the 2nd of August, and my today's presentation, my dear subscribers, is on the latest crisis, which is Trump's threat to deploy 2 nuclear subs to Russian borders. So the topic today is Putin's response to Trump sub deployment. Now, there are 3 sections in today's presentation. The first, I will deal with this exchange between Trump and Putin and Medvedev, the diplomatic side of the crisis that we're in now. The second part, I would like to say a few words about the new developments in Russian military operations since last week when I discussed Russian attacks in the special operations. And the third part is a few words about Zelensky now that he had restored in a vote in the parliament, the Rada, the anti-corruption body's independence. So let me start with the first one, and that is Trump's threat. Now, the threat originated from the exchange between former President Medvedev, who referred to a Russian so-called dead hand strike. Let me explain what it is. Some of them didn't quite understand in the comments that I read what he meant and so forth. Now, the thing, of course, is that the Russians had been anticipating a possible decapitation strike against Russia by the United States or NATO or both. And that gained more validity in recent times because of the attempted decapitation strike against Iran by the Israelis. So what Medvedev referred to is a program which I'm sure the Pentagon specialists know what it is basically not just the subs lying low at the bottom of the ocean close to the United States, but they are the containers with the missiles inside them, totally invisible, undiscoverable because they are not active. They're just sitting there at the bottom of the ocean. And if Russia is destroyed or attacked, or Moscow is blown up, or any decapitation strike is attempted, then they go into action. The containers open and the missiles fly and hit their targets in the United States. So that is what Medvedev meant in a kind of a warning. If you think of decapitation strike against Russia, this is what's going to happen. Dead man retribution. Now, Trump's response, of course, to that by deploying 2 nuclear missiles, 2 nuclear submarines to Russian coast is very disturbing. And Scott Ritter explained all the military ramifications of this, that they are actually more discoverable when they move and so on. In other words, this is called as a belligerent step, and it actually triggers certain military countermeasures that the Russians don't talk about, but they probably are taking. But on the level of international politics, what's important is Putin's response, which some media got correctly, but some ignored, as always. So what did Putin in the meeting with Lukashenko respond? It's quite peaceful in a sense, or constructive if you want. He basically said that the conditions or the terms that Russia is willing to accept now are the same as a year ago, which is June 2024, and that had been voiced many, many times. In other words, Putin's response to Trump is, we are ready. We are ready to sign accords on our terms. And the terms are well known. 4 provinces. Now that's important because Russian public opinion now is not happy with just 4 terms. A lot of people say that we've been fighting NATO and now we want Odessa and we want Kharkov and we want political control over the rest of Ukraine. Nevertheless, Putin repeated publicly that The terms that are acceptable to Russia is 4 provinces, include, of course, plus Crimea. And of course, the same things: recognition of Russian Orthodox Church, restoration of Russian language, no NATO membership, no foreign troops, etc. Now, politically, that is important because Putin signals to Trump, if you really want a peaceful deal by 8th of August, it is still possible. And I don't exclude the possibility that it may happen if there's an accord by whatever means, telephone calls, visits, or Istanbul format, whatever. That is still possible. So the door is still open for the United States to expand. Now, the next, of course, point is the threat of sanctions and secondary sanctions on third countries. As I predicted last week in my previous broadcast or podcast, is that both China and India and Brazil have refused to even consider Trump's threats. Moreover, this policy of threats actually pushed them closer to Russia. And the Indians are particularly very, very upset, and so is Brazil, and so is China, because nobody wants when people talk to them in threats and ultimatums. And it's particularly painful to these countries because they were colonies. And they don't like any references to being dictated to by the great powers, in this case, the United States. In other words, I think Trump did enormous harm to the relations with India, that Vance put so much effort during his visit to India earlier this year. Now the Indians are furious, and they're furious because they don't like being talked in a form of ultimatums. So this is as far as the diplomatic front is concerned. Let's hope that the window of opportunity will not be shut down in the coming days. The second part is the Russian military operations. The only thing I'd like to add today is something new that is beginning to happen and is beginning to acquire contours of a policy which is much more dynamic and much more effective in a way. Now, last week I spoke about special military operations, and this week what is new about it is that the Russians have targeted the transportation infrastructure. So not only they're hit the tunnel to Poland, but also they're targeting now the rail stations and storage facilities, and what's interesting, locomotives. Now, why locomotives are so important? Because Russian and Ukrainian rail is the same, and it is different than Western Europe. In Western Europe, it's smaller. And so when somebody takes a train, for example, as in the old good days, Moscow-Berlin, at the Polish border, what usually happens is that the train stands for a few hours until they change the wheels and the locomotive. Now, that's the thing. One can change the wheels of a rail car, but one cannot change the wheels of a locomotive. In other words, one locomotive destroyed means one fewer for the Ukrainian army to move supplies. And so this is what the Russians had been doing. They'd been destroying locomotives and railroad stations and facilities, storage facilities. Another special operation that merits attention is that the Ukrainians tried to do the same thing as the Russians by sending 3 boats onto the Crimean coast, as the Russians did on Achakov when they seized 2 British officers. And so they wanted to land undisguised and blow up Russian radar station, and the Russians say that they've been discovered and destroyed. And not only that, but the position of their original departure was identified and bombed and destroyed in Achakov. So this was another sort of exchange of special operations between the two. Now, and of course, the most important change in the military situation is that the Russians have almost completely completely surrounded Pokrovsk, which is a key strategic town in the south east of Donbas of Ukraine. And with the fall of Pokrovsk, there's strategically very little obstacle to Russian conquest, if you want, or liberation, as they put it, of the Western Donbass. The reason that is important is that, my dear friends, if you remember, earlier this year, I believe it was in April, it was Vance who said the Russians ask too much. They do not even control the territory they claim. So I think that this advance now is in a way a response to Vice President Vance, when the Russians are saying, we are close to controlling the entire Donbass, which is Russian territory by Russian constitution. And that means that you can accept the peace accord or ceasefire as a first step on our terms. This is what the message is. Now, the next item that I'd like to discuss is the situation in Ukraine. Now, as we all know from last week news, is that Zelensky outlawed or banned the National Anti-Corruption Committee, and then there was a huge firestorm or protests in Europe, and there was a message from the European Union that unless you restore the independence, we will cut the funding. So Zelensky pulled back, and now his same people with the same ruling party voted to restore independence of these bodies. Now, the political effect is what I want to talk about, and very briefly, because this is where things may unravel, and that was the title of my previous podcast. Now, what happens in Ukraine is that there are two competing blocs. Both of them are from the same nationalist camp. One of them is led by Poroshenko, the former president, and Kolomoisky, one of the richest men and an oligarch, who is now in jail. And the third man is Klitschko, who is the mayor of Kiev. These people, it seems, from what the opposition sources in Ukraine say, these people want to undermine Zelensky by depriving him of a majority in the Rada. And in fact, they are sort of succeeding, because there are more and more defections from the ruling party, the Servants of the People, Zelensky's party, because they're so obsessed with Zelensky, because he forced them to put one law into effect, sign it immediately, and within a few days reverse his course, which means he doesn't know what he's doing, or if he does know what he's doing, he's not doing it consistently, and that undermines support in him. That means that his chair is shaking up, that there are cracks in the foundation of his power. Now, what these people want to do, Poroshenko and others, is to deprive him of the majority and then force him to resign, or to have new elections in which they hope to win. Now, that makes perfect sense, but there was another strange report a few days ago by the GRU, which is state security agency in Russia, which claimed that Zaluzhny, an ambassador in London and a former commander-in-chief of Ukrainian armed forces, and Budanov, the Ukrainian security services, and Yermak, the presidential aide, are supposedly planning to seize power and appoint Zaluzhny as the president, and maybe even have elections, and he has high hopes of being elected. Now, both Poroshenko and Zaluzhny's camps are the same type of people. They're nationalists whose base of support is among the Bandera nationalist Ukrainians, who are the ones who want to be in NATO, ban Russian language, throw all the Russians out, defeat Russia, etc., etc. Now, since they are not cooperating, this means that if they succeed, one or the other, they may fundamentally split Ukraine, and that is what Arestovich was saying, split Ukraine into competing camps, and that of course would mean the collapse of Ukrainian statehood. So this is very dangerous games that are afoot in Ukraine now. So this is all for today, my dear friends. Please subscribe to my channel. Don't forget, I have various various playlists. And in addition to my playlist Personal Narratives, which I posted a few days ago, is the first part of a long series of a big interview which will appear in several parts. The first one is published and it's called Born in the USSR, about my childhood and life in the Soviet Union. Please look at that if you're interested. And I hope to see you soon in another edition of Issues of Contemporary Politics with Dr. Brovkin. Goodbye.